In this lesson, we're talking about probability and odds. So those two terms sound pretty similar. When we think of both those words, we think, what are the chances of something happen? If I say, what's the probability that something's going to happen, I'm asking you, how likely is it that it's going to happen? And odds, if I say, what are the odds of it happening, that seems pretty similar. We think of the same thing, but there's actually a difference between the two. So first we need to define a couple things. We need to define what an outcome is. An outcome is just what could happen. So what is something that could happen given a situation that we're looking at? An event is something that does happen. Okay. So the formal definition of probability. Probability is the likelihood that an event will occur. So the likelihood that something is going to happen. So we calculate probability by figuring out how many favorable outcomes we have over how many possible outcomes we have. And when we calculate probability, we're going to get a number between 0 and 1. So a 0 probability would mean that there's no chance that that event is going to happen. A probability of 1 would mean that that event is definitely going to happen, no matter what. Definitely going to happen. All right, so odds. What's the difference between odds and probabilities? So when we talk about odds, we're talking about our favorable outcomes. So what we want to happen. So odds is more of want versus what we don't want. Okay, so our favorable outcomes over our unfavorable outcomes. And we'll see the difference between the two in a second here. So if we have an example, we flip a coin. How many outcomes are there? Well, there's either heads or tails. So there's two outcomes. What's the probability of it turning up? Heads? Well, probability is favorable outcome. So our favorable outcome is we have one favorable outcome, heads. The possible outcomes are 2. So our probability of it happening would be 1 to 2, or 1 out of 2. The odds of it turning up heads would be 1, again, our favorable outcome, over our unfavorable outcome. So if we have 2 outcomes, this is favorable, this is unfavorable, we still have 1 unfavorable outcome. So the odds of it turning up heads would be 1 to 1, and we normally write that with a colon like this, as 1 to 1. If we have outcomes for rolling a die, so a 6-sided die, what's the probability of rolling a number divisible by 3? So first of all, possible outcomes are 6. We have 6 sides. What's the probability of rolling a number divisible by 3? Well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 and 6 are divisible by 3. So we have 2 favorable outcomes out of 6 total outcomes, which is 1 out of 3. The odds, we still have 2 favorable outcomes. Our unfavorable outcomes, we have 4 of those. So the odds would be 1 to 2 when we reduce that. How many outcomes if I spin this spinner right here? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces. So 8 outcomes. What's the probability of spinning a 2 or a 5? 2 or a 5, that means 2 favorable outcomes over 8 total outcomes. So probability would be 1 out of 4. The odds, 2 favorable outcomes. If I have 2 favorable, that means 6 of these are unfavorable. So the odds would be 1 out of 3 or 1 to 3. And that's the basics of probability and odds.